Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 841, and today's date is December 13th, 2015, and the title of the episode is The Current Economic Collapse News Brief. Now, before I get started, I just want to make an announcement. Today, I just placed an interview with Jeff Berwick on the X22 Report Spotlight YouTube channel, so you can go right over to X22 Report Spotlight, and you'll see the video there, or you can come over to the x22report.com site. You can scroll down a little bit, look over to your right-hand side, you'll see the video there, or you can go over to newssentinel.com, that's newssentinel.com. It is my news site where we are streaming news sources from around the world into one location to bring you everything so you can keep up to date on what is going on in the world. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, as we look at the financial situation here in the United States, throughout Europe, basically the private Western central bank system, we see that the economies that are controlled by the private Western central bank system, they're imploding. I mean, the debt is way too high. There's a lot of indicators that we've been talking about where things are just completely falling apart. Of course, the U.S. government, central bankers, they're trying to keep the illusion alive that everything is absolutely fine. But we have seen some signs, and actually when we look back in time, we're going to look at these signs and go, oh yeah, now it's perfectly clear. I understand why the whole collapse happened. I mean, it's almost like when we look back in 2008, you realize what they did and what caused it. And we're going to see the same thing happen when this crisis hits. And here are certain things that we are seeing right now, like the junk bonds. I mean, back in 2013, the yield on high-yield corporate bonds, the junk bonds, dipped below 5% for the first time in history. It shouldn't have taken a rocket scientist to figure out how absurd that was, but now the trend is reversing and the junk bond market is stalling investors and they're losing their shirts. One hedge fund that had invested heavily in these junk bonds suspended redemptions for its investors, something only really done in times of crisis. And this will be a moment when we look back and go, ah, yes, I see this. Another one is the Poppy loan. This is the loans that were created, the Proud Ownership Purchase Program loans for you. They were created in San Francisco from a San Francisco Federal Credit Union that would like to help its customers buy homes that are completely unaffordable. And what they've done, and we're seeing this not just here, but in many parts of the country, and especially with Freddie and Fannie and many of the small banks, where what they're doing is they are allowing customers to borrow up to $2 million with absolutely no money down. 0% down, $2 million at 4% interest rates. And you don't have to take out any private mortgage insurance. We see Freddie and Fannie, they're doing these types of loans where, listen, if you know somebody or someone's going to be living with you that is working, we're going to include that in your calculation to see if you can afford this house. They are doing whatever they possibly can to get people in, to keep these bubbles inflated. And we're going to look back in time and say, oh yes, I understand. This was another problem. We're going to look back in the auto loan industry and say, okay, we were giving auto loans to every single subprime person out there. If you had a heartbeat, you got a loan. Student loans. We're going to look back in time and say, okay, there were no jobs out there, but the U.S. government and everyone else, the corporate media, were continually pushing the idea, college. People can't find jobs, but they have $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 worth of debt. We're going to say, that was another problem. We're going to look back and say, manufacturing. Millions and millions of jobs lost in manufacturing. And guess what? They were replaced by part-time work. We're going to look back in time and say, the government changed their calculation on how they did unemployment. They didn't count all of these people. They said, no, they don't want a job. 100 million people, they're not looking. We're going to look back in time and we're going to say, All of these things were the problem. Then we're going to look at derivatives. Then we're going to look at the manipulation of the stock market, the suppression of gold and silver. And of course, by the time this all occurs, it would have been too late. We have already in the crash. We're beyond the crash. And we're looking back in time like we did in 2008. We can look back now and say, yes, it was subprime. We see what the bankers did. The bailout was fake, phony, and false. They caused the entire problem. Everything always leads back to the central bank. Now, our world leaders met in Paris for the climate accord, trying to convince everyone that they have to steal your wealth to help protect the earth, which is furthest from the truth, because all these leaders got together and they're saying this is the greatest threat of our generation. Global warming. Well, we know the climate is always changing. It always has throughout history. And they're trying to convince us that we are the cause of the problem. But what's very interesting is they got all together. They spent millions of pounds, hundreds of $1,000,000 to meet. They agreed on this 31-page pamphlet with no binding language or mechanism to force countries to live up to their promises to cut these greenhouse gases. But what's interesting about this is that all of these leaders created all this waste, flew over there in private planes, and created millions of tons in greenhouse gases. Right? This is if you believe their official story. So this is what they did. It reminds me of the time when General Motors wanted a bailout because the company was going bankrupt. And the CEO, instead of driving over and saving the company money, he took a jet plane and spent millions and millions of dollars flying to beg for money. This reminds me of the same exact thing, where all these leaders and bankers, they're flying around in their private jets, trying to tell the serfs, the slaves of the world, to give a little bit more so we can bail them out of this gigantic debt problem that they caused. Again, it always goes back to the central bank. And basically what they did there is absolutely nothing. Out of all of this, what's going to happen is they're going to try to tax every single person. They're going to try to push a corporate tax. They're going to try to get your wealth, because just like Christine Lagarde said, this is the perfect time to place a tax on everyone for carbon to pay down the debt. They're also talking about a 10% wealth tax. It always goes back to the same thing. And if you haven't seen James Corbett's video on global warming and climate change, on how they calculate all this, it is a very good video to look at. Just go right to his channel, and it explains most of the data, most of the information is located here in the United States, 6% or so of the landmass, and a lot of it is calculated right here, and a lot of the sensors are not on the ocean. They're not in every part of the world. And if you look at the satellite data, it shows that we are cooling right now, not warming. Now, out in Libya, we understand they're going to be signing this deal where they're going to have a unity government. And they're saying, yes, the rival factions, they've agreed to sign a United Nations-backed national unity government deal. But there's only one problem with this. And I know the corporate media, the US, Italy, where it's being held, they're all pushing this is a great thing. But the representatives from the two rival parliaments, one of them being Salal Makhzoom of the General National Congress based in Tripoli, and Mohammed Shoaib from the Tobruk-based House of Representatives, announced in Tunis that the signing of the deal will happen on Wednesday. But this is a problem because reality is that Makhzoom is no longer the representative. He was kicked out. And he is the person they're going to right now. So right now, this person does not represent the parliament in Tripoli, but they're using him to sign this deal. And what we're seeing is that the GNC is backed by Libya Dawn, and they're saying they're not signing this. They don't agree to this whatsoever. And we've seen this once before. And the whole deal fell apart. Even if this representative signs this, he's not a part of the Tripoli Parliament anymore. He was completely thrown out. So again, this is another trick that the U.S. government, central bankers, are trying to use. Now, if this deal completely falls apart, which most likely it will, and even if it's signed, it's null and void because the parliament in Tripoli didn't sign it, there's going to be, no matter which way you look at it, there's going to be war. And this is why France has been flying reconnaissance missions over Libya. They're getting ready to go into Libya, and the French PM is out there saying, yes, we need to go in there and get the Islamic State, which really means to get rid of the elected government that is there. Now, out in Turkey and Iraq, we see that Turkey has invaded Iraq. They're not leaving. Their troops are still there. And while they're there, they signed a deal with the Kurds to basically bring in more gas into their country. And the Kurdistan region in Iraq plans to deliver natural gas to Turkey by 2016. But this is completely illegal because they didn't go to the government of Iraq. And there's a huge, huge problem with this. Now, there's another incident with Russia and a Turkey vessel. And it looks like the Turkey vessel came very, very close to the Russian destroyer. And they fired warning shots to warn the vessel away. If you notice, they didn't, completely bomb it out of the water, just like Turkey shot down their bomber jet. They fired warning shots to warn them. Now, Iraq is making huge, huge gains in Ramadi. They have taken more and more of the land. There's only about 300 Islamic State terrorists left in there, and there's a little bit more in the inner cities. And of course, the U.S. is out there trying to push the idea that Iraq needs their help. They need more troops. And of course, basically what's happening here, the U.S. wants to go in there and defend the Islamic State or try to trip up the Iraqi forces so they don't destroy everything that is there. And we've seen this happen quite a bit. Iraq already knows about it. They already know they pulled the stunt before, where they kind of basically crippled the operations that they were trying to push throughout Iraq. We know right now that Iraq has video and photographs and documentation that the United States and British forces have been dropping supplies, ammunition, military assets to the Islamic State forces. And at this point, everyone realizes that the Islamic State works for the U.S. government, central bankers, Israel, the coalition forces. Now, the United States wants Germany to bring in more troops into Syria. They're already bringing in 1,200 troops plus special forces, but the U.S. is calling on them to bring even more into this area. Now, we're getting a couple of warnings out in the Middle East and in Switzerland. Switzerland has warned Americans of a terror threat. The Embassy of the United States in Switzerland is urging U.S. citizens to exercise caution, and they have raised their terror alert there. And right now, basically, we know at this point there's going to be many, many false flags occurring across Europe and here in the United States coming very soon, either by the end of this year or coming into 2016, because they need to push this agenda forward. They need to get the weapons away from the people. They have to get the authorization for war passed in Congress. They need to make sure that everyone realizes that the Islamic State is the enemy and we need to go after them. And they need to make sure that we understand that China and Russia, they are the biggest threat to the United States. And this is why we're seeing all this occur at this time. Another warning is in Lebanon and in Libya. They're urging U.S. citizens to avoid travel to these areas. They advise them that people who are living and working in Lebanon, that they should understand that they accept the risks of remaining in the country, which means that something is going to occur in this country. Now, we understand that in Yemen, in Libya, in Lebanon, Iraq, and Syria, the Islamic State, which is the proxy army for the United States government, is in each one of these countries. The authorization for war allows the United States to go into each one of these countries and remove the elected government or new government that was placed in there. It allows them to fight the people who are trying to get rid of the puppet government out of the country. And it allows them to go back in there and restore the puppet governments. Because what's happening in the Middle East is they are losing ground. The people are fighting back. And once the people gain control of these countries, the petrodollar is basically under threat of not being used anymore. We already see it occurring in Libya. The Tripoli government is selling the oil, not using the dollar. They tried many different things by moving the central bank out of Tripoli to a different location to have the countries come to them, but they're still going to Tripoli, the real government of Libya. And they tried to have the Islamic State come in and guard the oil refineries, the ports, to stop the deliveries, but everything is not working at this point. We see in Yemen, the Houthis are there. They are fighting to basically keep their country and keep the puppet ruler Hadi out of Yemen. And what we're seeing is this is spreading all across the Middle East. And if this continually spreads, the petrodollar is in trouble. If the petrodollar is in trouble, that means the dollar is in trouble. If the dollar is in trouble, that means we have a major, major problem here in the United States. And this is why they're pushing so hard to get into Syria, to build the pipeline, to put up a central bank, to put all their natural resources, oil, on the dollar, then eventually go into Iran. This has been their plan from the beginning. It is all falling apart, and the only thing they have left right now is to start war, because they need all eyes off of the central banking system, and they need that to be placed on another group or country to be blamed. They need the war to completely wipe out our current system, and they want to bring in a new system after the war. Now, of course, the war most likely will go nuclear, and these insane people believe that after the war, they're going to emerge from their bunkers and restart the entire system. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.